When I was here in this chair last night, I started the show by saying that Donald Trump's failed coup was worse than we thought. And 24 hours later, I am here to say once again that the failed coup was worse than we thought last night. Because we've got another damning new bit of information since we reported last night on the role that this man, former Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark, played in attempting to overturn American democracy. Last night, we told the story of the letter that Clark had drafted to be sent to Georgia state officials, and he wanted the acting attorney general at the time, Jeffrey Rosen, to sign it. Jeffrey Rosen there in the background. That letter basically said the following: the Department of Justice is investigating voting irregularities, and, well, you really can't trust the results one way or another, so you in Georgia should call a special session, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and send your own electors to Washington. Now, of course, since Georgia is run by Republicans, the idea is those electors would almost certainly be Trump electors, right? So it would be a violation of Georgia state law, a violation of the will of the people, right? Donald Trump lost the election in Georgia by 11,000 votes. It would throw the post-election process into chaos. Thankfully, Jeffrey Rosen, the acting attorney general, refused to sign it. The letter was never sent. Not for lack of trying, though, because the New York Times reported that Jeffrey Clark even cooked up a plot with Donald Trump, met with him in person, for Trump to fire Rosen so that Jeffrey Clark could take over his job and send the letter. And it was only when a group of senior Justice Department officials threatened mass resignations that Trump pulled back. Okay, well, we learned something new after the show last night. They weren't just targeting Georgia.
It turns out that this guy, Jeff Clark, was writing or drafting these types of letters to all the 6 states that ended up going for Joe Biden. And I think that, what we see is the beginning of the effort to overturn the election.
That was Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurti of Illinois, and he sits on the House Oversight Committee, which has been investigating Trump's efforts to overturn the election, and offered up that they were trying to run this operation in 6 states. That's based on another email written by Trump's personal secretary. Now, I guess these states are probably Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. Those are the states that Trump lost by the narrowest margin. And for Trump to win, he would somehow have to flip at least 3 of those states. So for the first time in the development of this whole story, through months of reporting and sort of patchwork bits of information, it's clear there was an actual cognizable plan to overturn the election, an actual strategy to get Donald Trump declared the winner of the election, not just throwing stuff against the wall and tantrum tweeting and easily dismissed fakakta lawsuits. Now, it seemed like a concrete strategy yesterday when we first saw that letter, but it was incomplete because, again, if they just overturned Georgia, which we know Trump was obsessed with, right, still wouldn't have mattered. Trump lost by more electoral votes than Georgia has. So he needed more than that. But if you got the attorney general sending that letter to 6 states, all of a sudden the math could work. That could actually do the trick. You know, much of what Donald Trump, and we watched it in real time, and his cronies did publicly in the aftermath of the election was, cringe-inducing. It was mockable, comical. Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood making outrageous, ridiculous claims and getting laughed out of court after court, and it all seemed quite impotent with no real, path or strategy. The cases kept getting thrown out. They had nowhere to go in the courts. But now it's clear that by late December, they had arrived at an actual plan in place they were trying to execute. And it wasn't just Jeffrey Clark. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was also at the center of it. Mark Meadows is a man who also participated in an attempt on the life of American democracy. Now, there's some conflicting reporting about how Trump and Clark originally got linked up, but in his new book, Wall Street Journal's Michael Bender writes, quote, Mark Meadows had helped introduce Trump to DOJ Attorney Jeffrey Clark, who was putting together a secret plan to oust Rosen, the acting attorney general, and force Georgia to overturn its results. We know from emails released by the House Oversight Committee at the end of December, beginning of January, that crucial period of time, right before January 6th, that Meadows was repeatedly pressing Rosen to investigate so-called voter fraud, including sending one email on January 1st that read, quote, there have been allegations of signature match anomalies in Fulton County, Georgia. I love the passive tense there. There have been allegations. Can you get Jeff Clark to engage on this issue immediately to determine if there's any truth to this allegation? Now, Meadows is asking for him to call in Clark because he knows Clark is on the team. And the next day, Meadows arranged the call between Trump and Georgia's Republican Secretary of State when Trump infamously said, quote, "I just want to find 11,780 votes. That's one more than what he needed." So Mark Meadows is in on the plot, obviously, and Clark and Trump together have a plan, and here's what appears to have been. They were going to try to use the completely fabricated allegations of voting fraud and irregularities that had been pumped into the atmosphere by Trump and repeated by his allies and the right-wing media, and use that to have the Department of Justice officially send a letter to the 6 most closely contested states, 5 of which have Republican-controlled legislatures, and say, hey, this is the official blessing of the U.S. Department of Justice telling you the results in your state are tainted, they can't be trusted, we don't really know who won, and by the way, you have the constitutional authority to call a special session, select a slate of Trump electors, and send them along to Washington. Keep in mind, the Republicans running these state legislatures are a receptive audience. They're the same people who in Michigan went like completely nuts over the governor's public health measures, or the legislators in Arizona who are running the sham election audit, or in Georgia who just passed a law to make voting much, much, much harder. They're all ears, generally, much more so than the courts. And so finally, after flailing in those courts where they got nowhere, they realized there's a much better avenue. Just have the Department of Justice give state Republicans the official green light to say, poof, elections tainted by fraud, got to send our own electors. Again, this is not Rudy Giuliani at Four Seasons Landscaping or Sidney Powell talking about the ghost of Hugo Chavez inhabiting the voting machines. No, this is an unnervingly plausible path to stealing the election. Luckily, it took them a while to get there. And I frankly don't have the words to describe what a cataclysm this all would have been if that letter had gone out and state Republicans had taken this signal in a number of these states and sent their own electors, because then you would have 2 slates of electors that are sent to Congress on January 6th. All of a sudden, you have a real fight about which ones are legitimate. And there is now, I mean, it's fabricated, but there's now a stronger case for Republicans to vote against Biden's electors, a much stronger case for Vice President Mike Pence to accept their challenge. Suddenly, Mike Pence is given the fig leaf he needs to keep Donald Trump in power. Or maybe it gets thrown to the House under the Electoral Count Act and the 12th Amendment, and the 30 states with Republican legislators vote for Donald Trump. The plan fell apart 3 days before the insurrection when senior DOJ officials put their careers on the line, to their great credit, to stop it. But who knows what could have happened? There are all sorts of ways this could have played out, and none of them is good. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California is a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, and he joins me now. And Congressman, I want to start with this email that's an indicator of the scope of the plot that was unearthed by the committee that you serve on. This is an email to Rosen and Donahue on December 28th. And he explains the Georgia letter we reported last night. It says, attached is a draft letter concerning the broader topic of election irregularities of any kind. The concept is to send to the governor, speaker, and president pro temp of each relevant state to indicate that in light of time urgency and sworn evidence of election irregularities presented to courts and the legislative committees, the legislators thereof should each assemble and make a decision about elector appointment in light of their deliberations. That's the Jeffrey Clark plot, it appears.
Chris, that is the smoking gun. It's unnerving how close Trump came to using the full weight of the Justice Department to overturn the election result. What Clark was saying to the Georgia governor and legislature is not just you have a green light, but you should call a special session and say that the election was corrupt and overturn the result. Now, here's the shocking part. He says this is a concept that we can use in every other battleground state. It's like a high school student doing a copy and paste assignment. I mean, there's not even a pretense of looking at the individual states and if there was fraud committed. Right. Basically, let's just use a copy of what we did in Georgia and send this to every other battleground state and tell them it's corrupt and they should have the legislature convene to have Trump electors. It is amazing how close Trump came to subverting our democracy.
Yeah, and we should note that Trump says this now, and we got those famous notes from Donahue, who's serving as the deputy to Jeffrey Rosen during this period of time. And again, I'm getting all this through the reporting and the documents. It seems fairly rock solid that Rosen and Donahue really did do the right thing here. But this, of course, is Trump saying, don't expect you to do that, meaning don't expect you to overturn the election. Just say the election was corrupt. Leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen. So that's December 21st. Like at that point, they really did have a plan. And I think that this has been a little slow to dawn on the American people, and it's kudos to your committee for unearthing this, that there really was a plan. It was not just the wheel-spinning, cringe-inducing carnival that was Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and Rudy Giuliani.
There was a plan, and the reason it matters to look backwards is because they could try to use this plan in the future. I mean, their plan is to say that state legislatures can overturn the popular will. And in Bush versus Gore, Rehnquist's opinion basically says that it's not people who have the right to elect a president, it's the state legislatures who have the right to elect a president. And what Trump was saying is we're going to have the Justice Department cast aspersions, say it's corrupt, and then have Republican state legislatures vote for a slate that would elect Trump. The really scary part, Chris, is what if Republicans do this again in the future and try to defer to state legislatures to elect a Republican candidate, even if the Democrat wins overwhelmingly the popular vote in those states?
So this is unearthed by the House Oversight Committee. My understanding is as of today, this investigation is being moved over to the January 6th committee. But I got to say, first of all, so A, I want to know that's right. But B, I got to say, I think Jeffrey Clark should be under oath tomorrow. And I think Mark Meadows should be under oath tomorrow. And I think we should hear from these people who should answer some questions, under penalty perjury about the role they played in attempting a coup.
Absolutely. I think they both need to answer questions. I do think that we need to coordinate with the Justice Department because I think in Clark's case, there's criminal exposure. I mean, if really what he was doing is sending copy and paste letters to states with no underlying even differentiation, that needs to be done. So the Oversight Committee is still going to be involved, but the Speaker is doing the right thing by consolidating it in the Select Committee, and the oversight staff that have been exceptional will be working with the Select Committee to get to the bottom of it and the facts.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for making some time with us tonight.
Thank you.
I want to bring in Ian Bassett, former Associate White House Counsel of President Obama, Executive Director at the nonprofit Protect Democracy. First, Ian, this is a question that I've asked a bunch of people at different points, which is the kind of, glass half full, half empty, right? I mean, the terrible thing about this is that they had a plan to try to overturn an election. The good thing is that it didn't work, and they met with the resistance that you would hope for at the upper echelon of the Justice Department, even handpicked people that Trump had installed. What's your takeaway?
I mean, look, we survived basically a Category 2 political hurricane last fall, but the Category 5 political hurricane is the one that's coming because, as Congressman Khanna just pointed out, past here is prologue. There is now a plan afoot by an autocratic faction in this country to put in place mechanisms to be able to succeed in overturning a future election in the ways that they failed in this past election. And it involves 3 steps, right? Step 1 is create enough mistrust, doubt, and suspicion in the system that you can create chaos and an opportunity for untoward action. So the entire big lie, the fake audit in Arizona, is all about flooding the system with distrust. Step 2 is make it harder for voters who would oppose your sort of autocratic faction to be able to vote. And then step 3 is give hyper-partisan loyalists greater power over the administration of elections so they can intervene and, as Congressman Khanna suggested, decide who they think should win, regardless of who the voters pick.
Yeah, and the ultimate, this is slightly technical, but I think it's worth taking a second with this. The sort of ultimate version of that is a theory that is, in my humble non-lawyer view, nuts and out there, but was essentially subscribed to by William Rehnquist in that Bush v. Gore, with 2 Republican-appointed justices signing on to it. And we think there's some openness to it among current justices, which basically says because the Constitution gives to the legislatures, that's the term they use, the sort of selection of the electors as they determine. that means that they can kind of, even if the way they determine is to pass a law in the state of Michigan that it goes to the winner of the election, they can then trump that later under a constitutional authority and say, like, no, Pennsylvania voters, you don't get to decide, we do at any time. Do I have that right?
I think you have the beginning parts of that right, but you made a leap that I don't think is going to actually pass muster in the court, which is that, yes, a state legislature under the Constitution can choose how to select the presidential electors. But for more than 50 years, every state in this country has chosen that the way to do that is to allow the people to vote. Once the state has chosen that, it cannot go back on that for a number of reasons. And the National Task Force on Election Crises, which is a cross-ideological group of Republicans and Democrats, liberals, and conservatives, all made this clear last year, which is two things. One, under federal law, Congress has said that states pick their presidential electors on the first Tuesday after the first Monday of every November. That's the date. So once that happens, the state legislature can't pick another date down the road. And then second, even under the Constitution, once the state legislature has given that power to the voters, it can't, after the fact, deprive them of their due process expectations to take it back. So a state would have to basically come out before the election and say, no, actually, we're going to let the state legislature choose. And Arizona tried to do that earlier this year. A bill was introduced to do that. Thankfully, it got defeated. But you know what? The legislator who introduced that bill is now running for Secretary of State of Arizona.
Wow. Oh, my God. Okay. Ian Basson, thank you so much for your time tonight.